Look around you. Right now, in this moment, humanity has more power than at any point in recorded history. We have supercomputers in our pockets. We have medicines that defeat ancient diseases. We have satellites mapping every corner of this earth. We have artificial intelligence rewriting the rules of what's even possible. And yet, anxiety is at an all-time high. Depression is a global epidemic. Wars are multiplying. Families are fracturing. People who live in the same house feel like strangers. Nations with nuclear weapons argue like children. The wealthiest people on earth report feeling profoundly empty. How is this possible? How can a civilization this advanced feel this lost? That question, that single burning question, is exactly what this video is about. And I promise you, by the time we reach the end, something inside you is going to shift. Not because I'll give you a motivational speech, but because we're going to uncover something that science, politics, and religion have all failed to address. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something. Drop a comment right now and tell me where you're watching from, your country, your city, your little corner of this world. Because this conversation we're about to have, it belongs to all of humanity, and I want to know exactly where humanity is listening from today. Now, back to the question. The ancient spiritual traditions of the world, from Vedanta to Sufism, from Buddhism to Christian mysticism, all pointed to the same diagnosis thousands of years ago. The problem is not outside of you. The problem lives within the architecture of human consciousness itself. We have forgotten who we are, not metaphorically, literally, biologically, neurologically, spiritually. Modern neuroscience actually confirms what the ancient sages whispered in silence. The human brain constructs a version of you that is fundamentally incomplete. It builds an identity out of your name, your body, your beliefs, your fears, your past, and then it tells you this is all you are. That constructed identity has a name in spiritual tradition. It's called the ego. And the ego, not poverty, not politics, not technology, is the single greatest source of human suffering on this planet. Science gave us tools, but not peace. Property gave us comfort, but not satisfaction. Power gave us dominance, but not love, because none of those things touched the real wound. The wound is internal, ancient, and it has been bleeding for centuries beneath the surface of every war, every broken relationship, every silent crisis happening inside a human heart right now. The darkness isn't out there. It never was. So where is it? It lives in the space between who you truly are and who you've been told you are. Let's get precise here, because when most people hear the word ego, they think of arrogance. They think of a loud, boastful person dominating a room. But that's not what we're talking about. The ego we're discussing is far more subtle, far more dangerous, and almost every human being on this planet carries it without ever knowing it's there. Here's what the ego actually is. It is the mind's deeply conditioned belief that you are only this, your body, your name, your nationality, your religion, your profession, your past. It is the invisible wall that the brain constructs around your sense of self. And neuroscience has a name for the system that builds this wall, the default mode network. It's a web of brain regions that activates when you're not focused on the outside world. When it fires, it does one primary thing. It generates the story of me, your history, your wounds, your identity, your fears, over and over on a loop. This is not a flaw. It once was a survival mechanism. The brain needed a stable sense of self to navigate a dangerous world. But somewhere along the way, that mechanism became a prison. Because the moment you believe you are only your identity, something quietly, tragically shifts. You start seeing the world in terms of me and not me, my family versus yours, my religion versus yours, my nation versus yours, my truth versus yours. The ancient Vedantic texts called this avidya, primal ignorance. Not the ignorance of lacking information, but the ignorance of mistaking the limited for the limitless, mistaking the costume for the consciousness wearing it. And here is where it gets staggering. Every conflict in human history, every war, every genocide, every broken marriage, every moment of cruelty between two human beings can be traced back to this single misidentification. The belief that I end where my skin ends, that you are fundamentally separate from me, that protecting my identity justifies harming yours. Ego doesn't just create arrogance, it creates enemies. It turns neighbors into threats. It turns differences into weapons. It turns the beautiful diversity of human experience into a battlefield. But here's what the ego cannot survive: awareness. The moment a human being begins to genuinely question, who am I beyond this identity, the wall begins to crack. Light enters, and that light has a name across every wisdom tradition that has ever existed on this earth. It is called self-knowledge. The ancient sages didn't call it philosophy, they called it liberation. And the question now becomes, how do you actually get there? But liberation from what exactly? From the noise, from the loop, from the exhausting performance of being a self that was never truly yours to begin with. And here is where most spiritual conversations lose people. They stay abstract, they stay poetic, they float in the clouds of beautiful language and never land. So let's land this, right now, precisely, practically. The self-interview, this process of turning inward, is not a luxury reserved for monks in mountain monasteries. It is not a weekend retreat you attend once and forget. It is a daily, deliberate practice of asking the most important question a human being can ask. Who is the one experiencing all of this? Not what are you feeling, not what are you thinking, but who is the one aware of the feeling? Who is the one watching the thought? That witnessing presence, that silent, stable awareness behind all experience is what every great spiritual tradition points to as your true nature. In Vedanta, it is called Atman. In Buddhism, Rigpa. In Christian mysticism, the ground of the soul. In neuroscience, researchers like Dr. Judson Brewer and Dr. Richard Davidson have shown that contemplative practices, meditation, deep self-reflection, physically rewire the brain. The default mode network quiets, the grip of the constructed self loosens, the nervous system shifts from chronic threat response into a state of coherence, clarity, and openness. This is not metaphor, this is measurable, this is biological. When a person sits in stillness, genuinely, consistently, something extraordinary begins to happen. The mental noise that normally dominates every waking moment starts to settle, like sediment sinking to the bottom of a glass of water. And as it settles, something becomes visible that was always there, but buried beneath the noise. A light, quiet, steady, unshakable. That is the light the ancient texts spoke of, not a mystical hallucination, but the direct experience of awareness recognizing itself. And when that recognition deepens, when it moves from occasional glimpse to lived reality, the ego's architecture begins to collapse. Not dramatically, not violently, but naturally, the way darkness dissolves when a lamp is lit. Meditation is one door, but it is not the only one. Honest self-reflection is a door. Selfless service is a door. Living with integrity, even when it costs you, that is a door. Each practice does the same thing. It interrupts the ego's story. It creates a gap between stimulus and reaction, and in that gap, consciousness recognizes itself. Now, here is what changes in a person who walks through that door consistently. They stop needing to win. They stop needing to dominate. They stop needing the world to confirm their identity because they've found something inside that no external achievement can give and no external loss can take away. Humility becomes natural, not performed, natural, because they've touched the understanding that the real intelligence animating this body, this breath, this mind, is not personal.
It belongs to something vast, something shared, something that looks out through every pair of eyes on this planet. And that understanding, that single living realization, does something to a human being that no ideology, no law, no political system has ever been able to do. It breaks the root of violence, not by force, but by revelation. So the question now is, what does the world actually look like when enough human beings carry this light? Let me paint you a picture. Not a fantasy, not a utopia drawn from wishful thinking, but a logical, inevitable outcome, the natural result of cause meeting effect. Because if ego is the seed of all conflict, then self-awareness is the seed of all peace, and seeds, when planted consistently, always grow. Imagine a courtroom where the judge has done the inner work, where justice isn't filtered through ego, through bias,
through the unconscious need to protect identity. Imagine a parent who has met themselves, truly met themselves, raising a child not from fear and control, but from presence and love. Imagine a political leader whose decisions are not driven by the hunger for power, but anchored in genuine service. Imagine a society where the first education every child receives is not just mathematics and language, but the knowledge of who they are beneath the noise. This is not idealism. This is the oldest wisdom on earth finally being taken seriously. History already shows us glimpses. Every civilization that experienced periods of genuine flourishing, of art, of justice, of human dignity, was anchored in some form of inner culture. When the inner life of a people was honored, the outer life reflected it. When it was abandoned, when external achievement became the only measure of worth, collapse followed, every single time. We are living in that collapse right now. But here is what is also true. Collapse is not the end. It is the pressure that precedes transformation. The darkness before dawn is not a sign that the sun is gone. It is the sign that dawn is close. And the dawn begins with one person, you. Not a version of you that has everything figured out, not a perfected, enlightened being floating above ordinary life, just you, willing to ask the question, willing to sit in silence for a few minutes each day and face the most confronting, most liberating inquiry a human being can make. Who am I, really? That question, asked sincerely and consistently, will do more to change your life than any strategy, any achievement, any external revolution ever could. Because when you change at that level, the level of identity, of consciousness, of how you perceive yourself and every other being, everything downstream changes with it. Your relationships, your decisions, your presence, your impact. The light of self-knowledge is not a concept to be debated. It is a fire to be lit. And fire spreads. One awakened human being sitting in a family changes the emotional temperature of that family. One self-aware leader in a community shifts the quality of every decision made. One teacher who has met themselves plants seeds in hundreds of young minds that will bloom for generations. This is how humanity has always transformed, not through grand declarations, through individual awakening, rippling outward, silently, powerfully, unstoppably. The ego built walls, consciousness dissolves them. The ego created enemies, awareness reveals brothers and sisters. The ego made the world a battlefield, self-knowledge makes it a home. So here is my final word to you today. The sun of enlightenment is rising. You can feel it. That's why you're here watching this, resonating with these words. The night of ego has been long, but it has never been permanent, and it will not be permanent now. Begin the self-interview.
Today, in the silence between your thoughts, in the space behind your eyes, in the quiet that exists before the mind starts its noise. That is where you live. That is where peace lives. That is where the real morning of humanity begins. If this message reached something real inside you, join this community, hit subscribe, and let's walk this path together.